My name is Rob Weiss. I'm a clinical social worker by training, and social workers rock. Thank you very much. Woohoo! Not that, oh, don't boo us. Do you know what a hard life we have? Anyway, it's just that label of social worker. Just people have all kinds of opinions about that. But anyway, I'm a clinical social worker by training. My expertise is in compulsive and addictive sexuality. I've been working in the field of sex addiction since the late 80s, early 90s. My first training after school was with Patrick Carnes. I spent about 3 or 4 years working in a residential center, inpatient, with mostly men who were sexually acting out, some women, and also some offenders. In 1995, I opened a treatment center in Los Angeles called the Sexual Recovery Institute, and we were the first program for sex addiction outpatient in LA, because I didn't know where to refer, so I opened a clinic. And we're still there. And we see about 130 people a week, local outpatient treatment. We have 7 groups, 1 for spouses. And we run an intensive program. People come from all over the country to come to treatment with us. And we do great work. Thank you all for coming. I'm glad you're here. This is going to be the time when we talk about difficult issues, because the population that I want to talk about is not fun to have in your office. It's just not. These are people who are in great pain and experiencing great loss. And what I wanted to help you learn from is some of my mistakes. And maybe you won't make these mistakes, and maybe you haven't had these issues come up in your practices or your work. This is something that I had to learn the hard way. As I said, I opened a clinic in 1995, and it really was probably about 2004 before we started having what I would call a really healthy, productive spouses program. And that's because I did not understand how to work with this population. They didn't make sense to me. I found them very difficult. And there was what's the word? I guess a feeling or a thought in my little niche of the profession, which is people who act out sexually, and those who serve them professionally, therapists, that betrayed spouses are not a lot of fun, and to be around. And so we've pathologized them, we've devalued them, we've labeled them, we've given them inappropriate treatment, all of which I'm going to talk about. I'm also going to talk about what we do with them, and I want you to understand that this is what we do in sex addiction treatment when we have a spouse who is finding out about a tremendous amount of betrayal or violation, and how we work with them, and that's what this is. This may not be what you would be doing in a regular practice, if you will, or a regular outpatient, but certainly there's a lot to learn from here, and I'll provide you with resources and information for more. What I have to say comes from working with people who are experiencing massive amounts of betrayal and emotional violation, and uncovering secrets that, it's the and I'm not going to say this wrong, Elin Woods. It's like finding out your husband's been with 15 or 20 people. It's just, that your husband or spouse has been, had this whole secret double life that you didn't know about. And what does that mean for your life? And that's what I'm going to talk about. That's the population we're working with. So what I'm not talking about is someone who may have had a brief affair, or gone to a strip club and had a lap dance once 5 years ago at a conference. That's not the kind of betrayal I'm talking about. I'm talking about life turning upside down. I don't know who you are. I thought we had this thing together, and now I don't know what we have, and I'm worried about the children kind of betrayal. That's the level of betrayal that I work with. By the way, let me just say really quickly, if you treat sex addicts and you work with sex addiction, any addicts really, what you're going to come to know pretty quickly is that addicts do not come into treatment because they want to be better people. I know that deep down they do want to be better people, Maybe, but they come into treatment because their wife's going to leave them, or they got a disease, or they got arrested, or their boss found all the porn on the computer, or whatever is a significant factor that, like with drug addicts and alcoholics, that created the crisis that pushes them into treatment. But I just don't have people, and I've probably treated well over 1,000 men and a good 100 women or so who are sex addicts, and I have not seen one of them come in and say, I just really want to see you because I want to be the kind of person I know I can be. That just doesn't happen. I want you to now diagnose this client. So she acts out in angry, vengeful. Ways. She's superficially supportive of treatment, while at the same time she can sometimes undermine it. She's often shifting from idealizing her spouse, like you're a couples therapist, and this is the couple, this is the wife. She shifts from idealizing her spouse, idealizing the therapist in treatment, to devaluing and dismissing them. She can be demanding and boundaryless. She expresses feeling out of control. She engages in compulsive behaviors like detective work. She goes through his computer. She goes through his receipts, his visa bills. She stalks him. She is trying to gain some sense of control. She seems to be on a mood roller coaster. And it's hard to tell which mood is going to predominate when she's in your office, why or when. She's mistrustful, she's suspicious, she can even be rageful and verbally abusive. She can act out herself by overeating, spending, and other compulsive behavior. She's inconsistent, she's uncommitted to looking at her part and her issues, and she tends to externalize and blame. Now, who is this person? Is she an access to disorder, borderline, extreme codependent traits? Is she profoundly and inexorably just codependent? Poor dear, she lost herself to him. She just lost herself. Or is she a client who's suffering from a profound life trauma and a grief reaction without much meaningful support or direction? And my answer is, it's going to take a while before you know. And this is my pushback, and I think we're seeing this from people who actually wrote the books about codependency, to the idea that maybe these spouses, well, let me give you the Al Gore analogy, which is the frog in the boiling water, right? I mean, if you're a 20-year-old spouse or a 19 or a 21 or a 22-year-old and you fall in love and you marry someone and you start to carry out a life together and then you have kids and he increasingly over time becomes more distant, less available, working harder, out a lot, and you're raising 2 or 3 kids and trying to juggle all this stuff and you're having less and less sex, and less intimate, less and less emotional, but you're thinking to yourself, well, I have kids, we have a busy life. You say to him, something seems different, something seems wrong, you seem far away, you don't want to be with me, and he says, why are you always after me? You know how hard I'm working, why are you bugging me about this? You're so jealous, leave me alone. And repeat for the next 5 years, and then all of a sudden, or over a short period of time, she discovers that there's been this whole thing going on that she didn't know anything about. That is... That's a profound source of trauma, to find out that someone that you have depended on for your safety, security, stability, and the protection of your family, mutual protection of your family, isn't who they say they are. And the thing about trust is when it's gone, it's gone. And you cannot replace the naive trust of a vow and a commitment like that with words or flowers or candy or jewelry. It just doesn't work that way. And so literally the rug has been pulled out from under these women, and they come in looking for something to hold on to, and they don't have anything to hold on to. They're trying to hold on to visa bills or telephone receipts or cell phone bills or histories in a computer to try to figure out what their life is and how to make sense of their world and their place in it, because they knew where they were and they knew who they were, not because they were leaning on him and losing themselves, because they were paired. She thought they were paired in a mutual goal and mutual direction they were moving toward, and then she finds out that that wasn't true at all. They had this thing going on, but then there was this thing going on which served to the potential of undermining, threatening, and destroying everything that she had thought they were doing. Again, I'm not talking about the sexual encounter at the conference 5 years ago. I'm talking about a consistent and persistent pattern of sexual or romantic acting out that has gone on parallel to the relationship that she really knew little or nothing about. And the frog in the boiling water analogy is simply, if that story that I told you about the 20-year-old woman who becomes a 33 or 35-year-old woman with 3 kids before she finds out what's really been going on. That's like the frog you put in the cool water and you slowly turn the heat up. And he becomes more and more unavailable, more and more distant, less and less sexual. And you say, well, maybe this is the new reality. Maybe this is the new reality. Maybe this is the new reality. And the water's boiling before she knows it. And it's very easy for anyone on the outside to say, well, why in the world would she be in that water? Well, you know what? As a 33-year-old woman, if she jumped in the water, it would have been too hot. She probably would have jumped out. But as a 20-year-old woman who started out in that water, she just doesn't know the difference. It's just her world. And so when people say things like, I can't believe she didn't know, or how could she be the last to know? I think, well, of course she would be the last to know, because when you love someone and you're depending on them, you believe in them. You know? I mean, you know that early childhood narcissism that we work through with clients who've had a lot of abuse, they idealize their parents despite profound abuse. You know, because that's part, and we idealize our spouses and defend our spouses because we believe there's deep attachment and trust, and we dismiss the problems and issues because life is challenging. You know, we're not looking for the profound defect in our spouse. We're looking for our spouses to come through. So let me give you a little overview of how this population has been treated in the past. We're going to talk about how they have not been helpfully treated, what their real needs are of treatment, the betrayed spouse, how it is useful to help include them in the treatment of someone that we're working with, a sex addict, a love addict, or someone who's had long-term infidelity, and how do we handle potential non-participation, rage, undermining, and things like that. Has anybody had people like this in their office? I just want to check it out, because not everybody works with sex addicts. Okay, they're challenging. You know, they don't want to be there. That's it, you know. They want life to go back to the way it was. I mean, not the way it was, the way they thought it was. They want life to go back to the way they thought it was. And that's not going to happen. You can't take away this new reality for them, as much pain as they may be in. They don't want to be in treatment. And like, you know, much like the spouses of an alcoholic, they might want him to go get better, you know, and they don't want to have to think that, I mean, they already think that they're at fault on some level. So we'll talk about that in a second. So, what do we got here? Infidelity and betrayal. I mentioned this morning. Our concepts about what constitutes infidelity have changed due to the internet and can create confusion for spouses and treating clinicians, because you have people who say, well, this is just a guy thing, looking at these women, looking at these, you know, whatever, or looking at these men. And I don't mean to not, I have to say that 80% or more of our clients are heterosexual married people. So that is the population that I'm speaking to. There are other populations that do come in the office, but this is really what I'm here to talk about today. I mentioned this morning that I define infidelity as the keeping of secrets, because that's what I see the spouses most hurt about. That's the most violating part of what they experience, is that there's this whole world and life that's been going on that I just knew nothing about, and they feel stupid. I said this a moment ago, and I repeat it. For sex addicts and partners, love addicts and partners, etc., infidelity and betrayal are on a profoundly higher level. A lot more partners. Again, I think we can think of this recent golfer and his experience. You know, we're talking about 20 women or 25 women. That's a profoundly higher level than this little affair that someone might have had. And therefore, because the infidelity is on a higher level, the spouse's emotional reactivity is much, much higher. And their shame, the spouse's shame, is more elevated, because what am I doing with this person? Why didn't I realize this? Well, what was I thinking? I should have known better. They're already angry at themselves for having put themselves in a situation that I don't know that they could have avoided. Maybe they could have, maybe they couldn't have. And Carnes talks about, sexual secrets being the ones that carry the most shame, and yet being the ones that are least likely to be told. And I think that's really true, that people do keep their sexual secrets to the end. So, one of the things that comes up early on in treatment is, should I stay or should I go? And this really came up with the Elin Woods thing, I think, because there was all this stuff in the press which made me really mad, I have to say, about why would a woman stay with a guy like that? Children, family, community, marriage vow, you know, a lot of reasons. And interestingly, I think I have the stats in here, I've treated well over, I don't know, 500 or 600 couples at least with this issue over the last 20 years. And I can say that, research tells me that about 80 to 85% stay together. 80 to 85% of the couples stay together despite massive betrayal. So there's a lot more going on there. Now you can say, boy, that's really sick. Or you can say, wow, those people have a deep level of attachment that goes beyond even all of the other stuff that's going on, and how do we address that? And one of the things that I've heard the spouses say that they were unhappy about was going to a therapist's office and saying, you know, I just found out my husband has been seeing prostitutes regularly for about 12 years, and he's had 3 affairs, and he has 300 images of porn on the computer, which the kids just found, and that's how I got into all that. And the therapist had such countertransference, like, why don't you leave that jerk? You know, and that's not what the spouse wants to hear. You know, they want their life to go back together. They don't want it to come apart further. Maybe later on they're going to say, you know, get rid of him. But in the beginning, they want to understand what's going on. They don't understand what's happening to them. They are in shock. And so what they need is education, support, and nurturing. So one of the things that I have to think about if they're thinking about leaving is we advise that if there's no violence and no specific harm to the spouse in that way, and of course the children, give it 6 months. Let us do treatment. Let us work. Now, 6 months doesn't mean that you have to live together. It doesn't mean you have to share a bed together. It doesn't mean, you know, it doesn't mean that you have to be in the same town, but it does mean that you're not going to call the lawyers and you're not going to create all this drama that's going to distract from the fact that you're going to have to come back and look each other in the eye at some point. So we discourage taking a strong, big action like leaving early on. We're also looking at, does she have the social and family resources to be on her own? Because a woman might say, I don't want to be with this person anymore, but she not be able to financially go out there, or he might have a lot more control over the finances or things like that. So does she have the social resources, the family resources, the finances? What about childcare? What about health issues? These are the things that I'm thinking about early on. You know, is there a commitment on both parts for there to be some kind of healing process that can go on? Because if they are both committed to working on this, then there's a lot that we can do. Now, I want to say how we have not helped this client in the past. I think I touched on that. But I'm talking about the betrayed spouse. We've pathologized them. We've called them borderline. We've called them codependent. We've too soon over-directed them to look at themselves and their issues, and we've initiated premature treatment, in my experience. Well, of course you did this. Let's look at your childhood. She doesn't want to look at her childhood because that tells her it's her fault. You know, and she already feels to blame and responsible. Maybe at some point a little bit further along that might happen, but early on, if you label her or you give her things that she needs to look at or work on, she's going to feel very resentful and very angry, and she's not going to stick around for treatment. And spouses are hard enough to keep in treatment, but leaving them reasons to doubt themselves or question their past is not useful in the beginning, in my experience. So we've encouraged them to doubt themselves. We've assigned responsibility to them for their husband or spouse is acting out. And by the way, the men that I work with, the heterosexual married men, are more than glad to say, well, and here's a typical nightmare situation for a couple of this nature. She finds out that he's been seeing prostitutes, having affairs, doing all this stuff. They go into a couples therapy office. They've been together 12 years. They have 2 kids, 3 kids, whatever it is. They're both working a lot. And she finds all this stuff out. And she's been crying for days. You know, she hasn't slept. They walk into the therapist's office, and, you know, she tells her story about what she found out and what he's been doing and not believing, not trusting. And then he tells his half, right? And he says, well, you know, she never really wants to have sex with me. And, you know, she's gained all this weight, and I've told her over time, like, she's really got to take better care of herself, and, you know, it's not that I want to be with these other people, and, you know, she's angry all the time, and so irritable, and so nagging, and so difficult to be around, and why would I want, I love you, dear, but this wasn't an unreasonable. So then the therapist turns and looks at this overweight, angry woman who hasn't slept in days, and he kind of looks at the guy like, well, I guess I could understand that. Right? That would be her worst nightmare. The question is, how did she get to be so unhappy? You know, how long do you live with insanity? In other words, you see something, you feel something, you talk about it, and the person you're depending on says, that's not true. You're crazy. I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you telling me that? Why are you accusing me of that? You know, eventually you start to shut down. You know, and why do you want to be sexual? Why would you want to be sexual with someone who's emotionally unavailable? You don't feel something's going on, doesn't feel right. So there are reasons maybe why this person has turned to food or spending or nagging or whatever it is that leaves them trying to get some sense of control over this out of control situation. So what presents as is today may not have always been, and I have to think about how did they get here? You know, we've also assigned them responsibility for his recovery. well, you know what, you just need to check on his computer list, and you need to talk to him about what happened at the meeting, and you need to make sure he gets to the meeting, and, made the spouse basically their parole officer, which is problematic to make love. I never wanted to make love with a parole officer, I have to say. No offense to any parole officers out in the audience, I just want to... And one other thing we've done is we've treated the addicts and not treated them, because we find them boundaryless, difficult, or full of rage, and so we've just sort of pushed them away. Now, what are we going to talk about? What does it say about us? I just think is a useful thing, to think about always. How is it that, we don't like people who act crazy and angry and rageful in our offices? I mean, isn't that our job, to tolerate and manage difficult people at times? But I think part of our pathologizing this population, I'm not saying that you guys all did this, I know the people in my field have done it, in other words, those of us who are dealing with a lot of betrayal all the time, is we just hate dealing with all those difficult, angry women, who are all over the place, and they're idealizing and hating, and they make love to him, and then they throw him out, and then they have a wonderful weekend, and she sees a billboard of some pretty woman, and she just turns to him and says, "I can't believe you did that." And he's sitting there saying, "We had a nice weekend, what's she talking about?" But if you put a trauma frame on it, it makes a whole lot more sense, by the way. But anyway, what does it say about us that we want to have a label or we want control. We want to be able to have a predictable, reliable way of dealing with this mess. And that tends to be more alienating to these spouses than it is supportive. So what are the needs of the spouse, of the betrayed spouse? And I really, it's interesting to speak at this moment, especially in this part of the country, because we've had such a global international example of this. Now you haven't seen that spouse go through these experiences, but I can tell you, knowing that this person went to Pine Grove, I know what treatment is there, because I know what treatment is there. And I can tell you what spouses who are dealing with that kind of betrayal, and especially in such a public way, God, I felt my heart just went out to this person, because not only does she have to deal with the humiliation, and her children who will see this on YouTube forever, right? They're only little kids, but that's going to be something they're going to learn about. And you don't want to learn about daddy's betrayal, which we'll talk about in a minute. But anyway, what are the needs of the spouse? They need direction regarding what they come in, they don't know what to do. They really need support regarding self-care, health, what to say to the family. Part of the shame, in my experience, for these women is that they on some level feel like it's their fault. They feel like if they tell someone that they're going to say, well, I told you to make love. They tell their mother, she's going to say, well, I told you to make love to him more. Or I told you to lose weight. Or they're afraid that if they talk about it, they will get blamed for the issue. They feel responsible for the issue. It's also a very shameful issue to talk about. You couldn't keep your man, on some level. So she doesn't tell anybody. I mean, it's not like you go to your neighbor. These days you might go to a friend and say, I think my husband's drinking a little too much. You don't go to your neighbor and say, I think my husband saw 30 or 40 prostitutes last year and has run up a $2,000 phone sex bill. That's not something you talk to your neighbor. So we talk to them about where to go, who to talk to, how to get support. And what if your husband has been having sex outside your relationship? Does that mean you have the potential to have a disease or some illness? And what do you do about that? Because that hasn't even often crossed their mind. We're educating them about addiction, about disclosure, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, about the dynamics of couples when they're in this kind of a crisis. We're letting her know that it's okay to be in a crisis, that she's having a crisis, that this is a life-changing event, and that she needs a tremendous amount of support, and we're there to help provide that and offer that. We offer the spouses holding and validation for all of their feelings. They get to be as angry as they need to be, as often as they need to be. And it doesn't have to make sense. They don't have to make sense. It doesn't matter that they don't want to make toast because they're so mad. That's fine, Or that they want to do crazy little things, or they want to be involved in this and they don't want to be involved in that. It doesn't have to make sense because this person has been violated. They're going through an experience of violation. Now, to the men in the audience, and those of you especially who may have had an affair, this is hard stuff to take. We don't like to have empathy for women's pain. Men do not like this. Maybe we're trained. Maybe there's something genetic where, we wouldn't be able to tolerate childbirth in those we love or something. But we don't like, and especially if we're the source of that pain, we try very quickly to make sure it gets glossed over and pushed away as quickly as possible. And these women need a lot of validation for what they're going through. And, they may be, and my experience is the anger part, the real intense pain and pushing away, that can take a year. That can take, it's not going to go away in 30 days or 60 days when people have been together for 6, 8, 10, 12 years. It just doesn't go away that quickly. She needs disclosure, and we strongly agree upon this in my field, that she has a right to know everything that has gone on in the relationship that she did not know about, if they're going to stay together. That the keeping of secrets in a relationship like this cannot exist if they're going to be intimate with each other. That she can't ever feel safe unless she really knows what has happened. I'm going to talk more about disclosure later. She needs social support by peers, by family when it's appropriate. We do spouses groups. Now that's a great, boy, you want to have an intense therapeutic experience? Put 8, 10, or 12 betrayed spouses in a room, you know? But how great that they get to go there and talk about it, and they know they're not alone because they feel so filled with shame anyway. And they need structure. How do I go forward with this person? Do I sleep with them? Do I not sleep with them? How do we deal with the kids? What is the process? So we have to have some kind of, and we do, some kind of process and structure in place for helping her. We're a resource for her. And we have to offer hope. Hope that this is going to get better because she's often very hopeless at this point. Now, what do they need? Why do we need spouses in treatment? Why can't we just do it without them if I'm working with someone who's acting out? Well, number one is they're tremendous collaterals. When I do an initial session with a betrayed couple, I want them both in there at the beginning of the session. I want to hear from her what her experience is, because guess what? If he comes in the office without her, I might not find out about a few things. Isn't what a surprise? So it's very important to me that she provides information at the beginning. And then also, why else? There's obviously going to be systemic needs in the relationship. They're going to need to be addressed. This is a couple in crisis, so I want to be observant of that. Also, when I evolve a trust, this is too many words for this, so you can read it if you want, but basically, I need to establish trust with her because she is already used to feeling like there's all this stuff going on that she doesn't know about. And so if her spouse is if her husband's going to treatment with me, what goes on in the therapeutic environment is something she doesn't know about, and that can leave her feeling more unsafe. I also need to join with her to let her know that I'm on her side, that this behavior is not okay. I don't care what kind of childhood he had or what kind of stressors he's under or what he's going through. It's not okay for him to do this, and I'm going to hold him to the mat, meaning you don't have to as much. In other words, you're not alone in holding him accountable. I will help you with this. And to him, I'm supportive of you. I'm there for you. I don't know why you did this. I'd like to understand it. Why you basically dropped a nuclear bomb on your relationship. But, I'm going to try to help you with that, but I'm also going to hold you accountable. Now, spouses are primary treatment motivators. The other thing I do in an initial session, if this is useful to you, because we do long assessments, is I'll meet with a spouse, hear what's been going on, send her out for coffee, understand what's been going on from his perspective, and then bring them both in to discuss what the treatment plan is. And why? Because I want her to hear the treatment plan. Because guess what? He might not do it. He might not want to come to those sessions or join that group or go to those meetings. But if she says, you're going to do that or I'm out of here, he's going to do it. I have no control or power over this person, but she has a lot of control and power. It's really important for me to align with the source of power because he would not be sitting in my office if it wasn't for her, most often. By the way, guess when I put together a website, for I have to say I run a treatment center called the Sexual Recovery Institute. I'm a really terrible marketer. I want to say that one of the things I had to think about is who's looking at my website. And I know that, first of all, 80% of my clients come from the internet because they don't talk about these issues. They don't reach out to friends, peers, doctors, therapists. They go online to find the therapy treatment center because they don't want anyone to know. And in addition to that, what was I just talking about? It's usually a wife who goes online finding something for them. So I keep in mind when I'm developing materials, program materials, and outreach materials that it needs to be friendly. Even though I'm mostly dealing with the guys who are acting out, it needs to be accessible to the spouses because they're usually the ones who are giving the initial shove for treatment. Now, sometimes spouses walk in and they have some information. It's tempting for an unfaithful partner to attempt some damage control by initially revealing some information or maybe none at all. A majority of addicts, in a survey that Deborah Corley and Jennifer Schneider did in 2002 in a wonderful book called Understanding Disclosure, which is how to tell secrets in a relationship. A majority of the addicts and their partners had, almost 60% of the addicts and 70% of the partners that were surveyed reported that there had been more than one major disclosure before they ended up in the therapist's office. So, you don't go after your husband with a golf club because it's the first time you've heard about any infidelity, would be my guess. I could be wrong, but I'm just saying, or you don't beat up a car. I'm not saying you're going after your husband. But and I don't even know what really happened there, but I'm really creating a metaphor. You don't end up at that level of rage the first time you hear about something. What happens is you've been given promises. You've been encouraged to believe a certain set of truths that aren't true. You've been painted a picture of something that ain't what reality is, and you have been disappointed over and over again, and eventually you can get to the point where that much rage is present. So when there are major disclosures one after another, that's a nightmare for the spouse. Let me see if I can move on. So, because all they want is they want to know what the bottom line is. The ground is shifting beneath my feet. When is this earthquake going to stop? And he says, it's over. That's all there is. There's nothing else to learn. And she says, okay, all right, I can handle that. And 3 weeks later, she finds something else in his wallet. And she says, what is this? And he says, that's the one thing I forgot to tell you about. And then the ground is shaking again. Only now when he says, but I promise that's it, she can't believe him. And that's very, very difficult for them. So, now this is the typical nightmare of disclosure as it goes on in a couple that's engaging in significant infidelity. He denies everything and blames her. I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you making this up? You're always going after me. Just because I don't want to have sex with you, you're too fat. Something like that. Maybe not quite like that, but he knows where to get her, where she'll leave him alone. He discloses only what has been already discovered. Yes, I was looking at those images in the computer, but I've never been with any. There's nothing else that's ever going on. That's it, that's it, that's it. And then he tells her a little more. Well, except for that one little thing that, because he's worried she's going to find something else. And then he's confronted more as things come out. And then he discloses all, maybe, or maybe not. And one of the things that it's not unusual for me to work with a guy, and I've got a guy coming in next week who said the following thing to me. I mean, he's been seeing us for a couple of weeks. Let me back up. This gentleman I'm working with, I've been married not that long, about 3 years. He's been acting out with women in his workplace and hiring prostitutes, both male and female, and doing a lot of online porn, and I mean a couple hours a day. And she found out first about the porn and then about the sexual affairs. And he said to me when we had a couple outpatient sessions, because he's going to start an IOP next week in intensive. I'm going to see him every day. And he said, well, my wife already knows everything. And what that means is she knows that he has looked at porn. She knows that he has seen a prostitute. She knows that maybe he went to a strip club. But she doesn't know how many times, how often, for what period of time, how long this has been going on. So even though she's enraged and furious, she really doesn't know how much of a problem this really is. And so she can't really gauge it, and he feels a lot better because she's not going to be mad at him anymore because he's gotten it all out. And the reality is that there's probably a lot there that she doesn't know about. So I never believe anyone. The minute they say, oh, my spouse knows all about it, I say to myself, well, I'm glad to hear that. But in my mind, I'm thinking we're going to go through it all anyway. And then, of course, seeking relief, he dumps everything without warning and then immediately seeks forgiveness and wonders why she isn't pleased. I've had these guys. Well, she asked me, and she asked me, and she asked me, and I felt really terrible about it. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to come home, I'm going to come clean, I'm going to tell her everything. And he's feeling really good about this. And so he goes to her and he says, okay, honey, I'm going to tell you everything that's been going on. And he tells her everything that's been going on, and she is devastated. And he doesn't understand. I thought she would want me to tell her the truth. Why isn't she feeling better? Because who's feeling better? He's feeling better because he's not holding on to all these secrets anymore. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about sex addicts. Sex addicts diminish and devalue their partners in their heads, and they distance themselves emotionally because that's how they can tolerate ambiguity. I cannot love you and be close to you and betray you and hurt you at the same time unless I'm sociopathic or psychotic. But what I can do is I can devalue you, I can distance myself from you, I can blame you, and I can hold you over there, so then I can say to myself, I deserve to be able to go over here. So you cannot be intimate and violate the partner at the same time unless you're psychotic or sociopathic. We're just kind of built that way. Because it's very hard to be really, really close to someone and hurt them at the same time unless you're psychotic or sociopathic. So I have to devalue you, distance myself from you, create a wall so that I can then feel justified in going out and acting out in some way. So sex addicts also, they externalize, they blame their unmet needs on the spouse. Poor me, I'm not getting any sex, and I'm not getting any love in this relationship, and I'm really, really unhappy, and look at the terrible marriage I have, and I deserve to get sensual massages a couple of times a week. And, when that guy comes in my office, and I'll say to him, there are other men who aren't happy in their relationships and feel their sexual needs aren't getting met, and they're playing golf, or they took up a new hobby, Or they redeveloped something with their, they found a way to manage, tolerate, and handle their frustration. Maybe they went to marital therapy. Maybe they divorced their spouse because they were so unhappy. But what they do, what not all guys do is feel unhappy about parts of their relationship, and then they say, well, fuck that, I'm going to run over here and get some over here. There are other choices. Because in their mind, this is the only choice. I was unhappy. I had to go do this. So I try to bust that for them a little bit. Sex addicts, when they're caught, they're terrified of abandonment. I mean, this is one of the big fears for them, is that you'll find me unlovable. So they'll use seduction, regret, blame, I'm so sorry. But it is an attempt to try to win the person back. Because if I can get you to forgive me, I feel better. That has nothing to do with empathy, by the way. Sex addicts confuse intensity with intimacy. So if we start having sex again, then I know things are going better. So they will also try to seduce by getting the spouse to be sexual again, because that means that we're doing better. If I can get her to be sexual. And by the way, spouses will do this too. Once they find out the whole truth, and this is kind of interesting to me, we have different sort of beliefs about it, and you guys I'm sure have your own. But I really believe that if you've been in a relationship with someone who has not been emotionally available to you for a long time because they have secrets and a secret life, and then they come clean with you, on some level, you're going to feel closer to them. And I have seen spouses move toward being sexual who felt frozen out for years and had no desire to be sexual. They started to find out all this information, and then they wanted to be sexual with him. And you think, well, why in the world would they want to be sexual when they're finding out they were betrayed? The reality is they feel sexual because at least there aren't any more secrets. At least they kind of know what's been going on. So not all do. Sex addicts don't understand what broken trust means because they think of it in limited terms. And I talked about this morning, where the guy who's been, putting money in the 401k for years and taking care of the finances because that was his part of the agreement, and that's what he was doing. And she says, I want to take over the finances. And he says, why? And she says, because I don't trust you. And he said, well, okay, but all I did was, have these affairs, do this, but I never touched our finances. Because he thinks of trust in limited terms. He thinks of himself. Because I will say to the men that I work with, for the most part, men, some women, mostly men, and you'll have to come to my sex addiction lecture for that sometime. I'll say to them, okay, would you steal from the company you work for? Absolutely not. Would you take money out of your kid's college fund? Oh my God, what are you accused of? I would never do anything like that. Because they see themselves as being so upright and trustworthy. Because it's only in this area that they're acting out. But spouses don't look at it that way. Spouses look at it like, I trusted you, and now I don't. So if I don't trust you, I don't know what you've been doing. And it's not unusual for a spouse to say, I'm worried about the kids. And could you be with the kids? Because if you were doing all this stuff, Lord knows, I don't know what you're capable of. And that is a reality for the spouse that is not for me to dismiss, that fear. It's not true ever that he's inappropriate, or nearly ever, that he's inappropriate with the children. The babysitter, though, another story. Okay, why do we do disclosure? Why give the spouse all this information? And I think that's a useful thing to understand. Number one, it is the road to intimacy. We don't really think a couple can move forward unless they are on the same playing ground. And she will always wonder what she doesn't know about unless she has an opportunity to ask and understand everything that's going on. And again, I'm not suggesting to you that if you're working with a couple where there's been one short or two short brief affairs, or there's been a little bit of porn, that you immediately sit down and talk about everything. I'm not saying that. So those of you who went on the road and had a little affair 5 years ago, please don't feel like you have to run home to your spouses and tell them what you did 5 years ago so that you'll be more intimate. I'm talking to you guys now. Because I don't want to take your phone call tonight, okay? But for these couples, it's the only road to intimacy because the double life that he's been living is so large that it's like a whole part of him that she doesn't know about, and she needs to know that part of him. By the way, we call it, I have to say this because I love this expression. I should probably write a book about this. We call it, you know how in our profession we talk about people knowing their inner child? You all heard this? I know that it's very California, right? I talked about this morning. But ego state therapy is kind of common, that loving, nurturing. Well, I want the men that I work with to really learn to embrace their inner asshole. And I mean that. Because they don't see the part of themselves that can really hurt somebody. They don't see themselves as being someone who could devastate someone else, and yet they have done that. And if you can own your stuff, if you know what you're capable of, You know, it makes it less likely to do it. I worry about the person who comes into treatment and says, I see what that has done to my life and I'll never do that again. I worry about that person. The person who says, I know what I did and I think that I could do that again and I need help, that's the person I feel more comfortable with, because I know that they know about that part of themselves that we don't want to know about. So these guys don't want to see themselves, and I want them to know that part of themselves. Secrecy is a big component of the addictive process in any addiction, and in recovery there can't be a double life, so he cannot continue to have all these secrets from her and pretend it never happened, because it leaves him more vulnerable to continuing the behavior. It reduces addictive shame. In other words, I have this secret, this thing that she doesn't know about, and if she knew about that, she would leave me, she wouldn't love me. You know, shame is that feeling of being unlovable, so as long as he knows that there's this thing she doesn't know about, that she wouldn't love him for or would leave him for, he's vulnerable because he can't really be real and open with her because he has a secret. The disclosure allows a peer-to-peer relationship. It empowers the spouse with the truth. They don't feel as crazy. You know what? It's not unusual for me to have men who are acting out on their honeymoons or acting out on the day before their kid was born or, you know, incredibly shameful stuff. And I have had more than one woman who really found it odd that on their honeymoon, their husband in Jamaica or Hawaii, wherever they were, went out for 3 hours to get a pack of cigarettes or you know, a bottle of champagne or some strawberries or whatever the heck. I'll be right back, honey. He doesn't come back for 3 hours. And that's stuck in her head. And I guarantee you, when we get to disclosure, she's going to say, I have to ask you this. On our honeymoon, when you were gone for 3 hours, something just didn't feel right to me. Were you out there doing this? You know, and I've gotten some yes answers. But if he says to her, we just got married. What, are you kidding me? Oh my God, I would never, you know, she feels crazy. Right from the get-go, she feels like, what's wrong with my intuition? What's wrong with my feelings? What's wrong with my sense of right and wrong? If I keep feeling this thing and I keep asking him and he says no, I must be crazy. So on some level, when disclosure happens and she gets to hear that she was right, that actually these things were going on, she feels validated and empowered, even though the stuff is not anything you really want to hear. At least she feels like, God, now I know why. You've been so distant from me. We've been so, now I understand. And that actually is the beginning, even though it's his worst nightmare, that's the beginning of some kind of growth for the couple. Otherwise, she feels like a crazy person. And it gives her the ability to make healthy choices. And you know what? She may not want to stay. She may not want to stay with somebody who has the potential to do this, and she has a right to that. But if she doesn't know what he has the potential to do or what he has done, who gets to say that she doesn't get to know those things? Who gets to say that decisions should be made about her future based on what he's afraid will happen if he tells her? I don't feel like I have that right. So we feel strongly in this field of sex addiction recovery that disclosure is important in the right circumstances, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It also, I think, introduces the potential for genuine intimacy, because this is when a couple is at ground zero and they need to start building something if they're going to build something. So, what do we got coming here? Is it useful? Well, I'll tell you what the people that we work with say. We did some surveys, about 200 couples. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a different study. 80 sex addicts and their partners. 60% of the addicts initially felt that disclosure was the right way to go. In other words, 60% felt like, yes, I do want to tell her, and the rest didn't. After disclosure, 96% of the men felt that it had been the right thing to do, to tell her. In contrast, despite the pain of disclosure, the pain of realizing it, 81% of the partners, of course, more of them, initially felt that disclosure was the right course, and in retrospect, 96 again, almost 100% felt that disclosure was the proper course. So afterwards, both members of the couple, how do you say that, the majority, I guess, felt that absolutely it had been useful and the right thing to do. Now, what am I walking into as a therapist? I'm giving you lots of background information. Well, I could be walking into a situation where the spouse knows nothing. I could walk into a situation where the spouse knows everything. I could walk into a situation, and this is the most likely one, where the spouse knows some. You know, each one of those presents its own set of criteria and questions, which I'm not going to have the time to get into today, but you can imagine it. My concerns for her, if she is the one who's been betrayed, are the following. Number one, safety. So, has he been having sex with people without using a condom? And I don't just mean vaginal sex. Has he been getting blowjobs from prostitutes? Because guess what? You can get chlamydia from oral sex, and you can get venereal warts from oral sex. It isn't just, we've been so HIV focused for the last 30 years, you forget that there are all kinds of little things. And what does human papillomavirus, which HPV, which is venereal warts, what does that do to men? It causes them to have itchy, uncomfortable bumps on their penises that have to be burned off. That's about it. Ooh, someone liked that idea. Yeah, burn them off. Okay. And I'll tell you, when you see somebody coming at your penis with a really hot thing, actually they burn them off with cold. But what does HPV do to women? It causes cervical cancer. So, and men may go years and years and years without actually having symptoms. So you can get blowjobs from prostitutes. You can stick your penis in a wall and have some guy give you a blowjob while you're looking at the adult film. But if you go home then and you have sex with your spouse, you're putting them at risk and not even thinking about it. So I am not an STD specialist, but it's always on my mind. Is this something that she has explored? I am, of course, interested in, is there anything that I need to worry about in the home? Are the children at risk in any way? And these days, the way children are most at risk is they're going to find pornography on the computer. Because as all of you know, any of you who are parents of kids over the age of 4, probably, know that your kids know more about the computer than you do. And if there's something to be found, they're going to find it. I was on the airplane flying out here, and I swear to God, this is absolutely true. There was this woman who just gotten a new iPhone or something, and she was sitting there with this little boy. He must have been 6. And she said to him, "Sweetheart, Mommy can't get the phone to go on the airplane mode. Can you do that?" So she handed it to her 6-year-old, and he, ding, right? He did it. They know more than we do. I also am concerned about anything that might betray or overwhelm her or undermine treatment later. So in other words, these things I'm going to disclose right away. If I have a couple coming in involving betrayal and significant sexual betrayal, I'm going to want right away to know if there's any risk to her health physically. I want her to know that. If there's anything in the family or the home environment that is threatening to the family, I need her to know about that. And if there's anything any overwhelming betrayals like your cousin or the next door neighbor or anything where it would be overwhelming for her to find out, I want her to know right away. Because she has a right to know that, and otherwise, what is the otherwise? Otherwise, we give it about 6 weeks before we do disclosure. I will bring the couple in and I will say, we're going to do this thing. I think it's really important. She's going to hear that. Another reason why I bring spouses in is if I say to him, alone in a room, we're going to do disclosure with your spouse, guess what's going to happen? I'll never see him again. I didn't like that therapist, honey. I'm going to go to another one. Okay, as long as you're going. But if she comes in and I say, you have a right to know what's been going on if you want to know, and if you're getting support, and do you want to know what's been going on? We'll take you through that process. There ain't no way he is not going to do disclosure, right? That's just not going to happen. So what is disclosure? It's when the keeper of secrets reveals the truth. It's not an apology. It's not a plea for forgiveness. It's not a bargaining chip. It's not, I'm going to tell you all this and then you'll let me move back in. It's not, I'm so sorry, I've ruined our lives and I love you so much. It's just none of those things. It's simply when the keeper of secrets reveals the truth, and it's not an apology. It's not, I'm so sorry. In fact, we rehearse these things. Why would I not want, now here's a good question. Why would I not want, if you're telling your spouse really difficult things that you have done that have hurt them, why would I not then encourage you to say, and I'm so sorry, I never meant to hurt you? Why would I not want to do that? Can someone? Who can't hear it? Well, they might hear it, but what does it do? That's right. It makes them have to take their eye off themselves and feel badly for him. I'm sorry you're feeling so. Them have to consider, do I want to forgive? Am I ready to forgive? What does this mean? And that's not her job in this session. Her job is to be angry. Her job is to be hurt. Her job is to feel whatever she's feeling and try to begin to figure out. Her job is not to take care of him. So that's my job. I can help him, not hers. So now clinical concerns around this. If you're treating couples who have a great deal of betrayal, sex addiction, multiple infidelities, that kind of thing, I have to be really clear, really clear about what my secrets policy is in working with a couple. And I will explain how this process works and what they're going to get to know, and the earlier the better, so that they can anticipate what they're going to be getting into. The couples therapist who keeps secrets from the partner without telling her that he's keeping secrets or she's keeping secrets from the partner loses credibility. I mean, I tell the partner, I'm going to be working with your husband, I'm going to explore every nook and cranny of his history, and then we're going to sit down and we're going to talk to you. And we're going to do that on April 15th. Okay, so that's very difficult for her, but she understands that it's a process that's going on and there's a date attached to it.
Is that when they're in residential treatment?
No, this is an outpatient treatment. But not in we will do disclosure in outpatient treatment after about 6 to 8 weeks of treatment. And in residential or inpatient, we'll do it faster.
How do you get the spouse to wait that long?
The spouse has to wait. They don't have an option. Because what happens is, if I push him to talk about it now, if you have to understand, sex addicts have a lot of secrets, not just one or two. And so a lot of things they don't even remember. So I have to go through detailed histories of where he's been and where, timelines and sexual histories and really get into the process of what it is he was doing and when, because he doesn't even know. And I have to be preparing her with social support, emotional support. If I just sort of do that in the very beginning, even though she says, I want it right now and I want to know because she does, I have to say, I'm really sorry, but you're going to have to wait. But while you're waiting, we're going to educate you, we're going to support you, we're going to introduce you to some other women who are going to help. We're in a process here. If we do it right off the get-go, what's going to happen is that there are going to be things he's not going to tell her because he doesn't remember and it's not organized. He's going to make it a huge apology or a plea for forgiveness. And it might be incredibly damaging to her on some level because I don't know her that well and I can't predict how she's going to respond. So we need time to do that. You can't just do it off the bat. But the couples therapist who keeps secrets and doesn't tell the partner they're keeping secrets is bound for destruction, right? Because if you have one guy who says to you, listen, I just want to tell you this, but don't tell my wife, and you're the therapist, that's a big problem, right? That's the end of the couples therapy right there. Couples therapy may be contraindicated in early treatment with couples who have had a lot of betrayal or sexual or relationship violation. And even when we do couples work, it might just be done with a lot of boundaries and a lot of structure because there's so much emotion in the room that we really can't, it's almost better to deal with them individually in the beginning and just set a lot of ground rules for living life outside of therapy and outside of treatment. In sex addiction treatment, it's best, I make the suggestion to all of you, it's best to not take on both people as your client. They just have too much stuff going on, and there's so much volatility, and each one of their needfulness and pull for you to be on their side is really powerful and great, and it's very hard to walk the middle. And we most often will have a therapist for the person who's doing the acting out and a therapist for the spouse, and then we'll either bring both of those therapists in when we do disclosure and work with them, or we'll have a third person who has nothing to do with either one, who's more neutral. But we don't take it on, even those of us who do this all day long don't take it on alone. So what do we do to get these guys ready? What do we do in this 6-week period, or in the intensives, what are we doing them 8 hours a day for 7 to 10 days before we do disclosure, if we do disclosure? And this is what we do. We're asking them for a period of abstinence from their sexual behavior, because I don't want to disclose anything if the person's still doing it, right? And I need to be 6 weeks into a treatment process in an outpatient setting. I need, with the person who's doing the acting out, so, again, I want you to think Tiger, because he's just a good example of someone who is in everybody's mind these days as someone who did this. This is someone who has to sit down and do a complete list of secrets and lies from their spouse. And by the way, all the press wants to know is what goes on in treatment. What is treatment? Why do people go to treatment for this? What's treatment about? Great, I'll be glad to talk to you about that stuff. But this is what goes on, in part, is that the guy who has to go through his entire history before, during, and after the relationship, or before, during the relationship, and recall every situation, every example in multiple settings, write everything down, including what happened before the coupleship. He has to do some kind of timeline or history, which he has already processed. So I've heard it, maybe a group has heard it. It isn't full of what I would call, it isn't problematic, it's clean. It isn't things like, well, I did sleep with this person, but that's when you were out of town, or that's when you were unavailable, or that's when you were pregnant, or, it's just, this is what I did. And that is what this is. This is what I did. I did this, and this. That's what disclosure is. It's not, as I said, a plea for forgiveness. And we're preparing him for how he's going to get support after he does this, because guess who's not going to want to be particularly loving or nurturing for him after he discloses all this stuff, But there are people who can love him. That's what group is for, that's what therapists are for, that's what 12-step programs are for, that's what other family members are for. There are other people who can care for him because he's not going to be able to turn to her for love and support, and he's going to really be hurting. We do role plays, we do group feedback. He goes through these lists a couple of times before he's ready to do it with the spouse. Now, what are we preparing the spouses for? Well, we're asking them, of course, what do they know, what do they not know? We're talking to them about where they're going to go and what kind of support they're going to get after we do this process. I want to make sure that she's in therapy. I want to make sure that she has support. I want to make sure that they drive in different cars so they don't have to drive back together, or that someone's giving her a ride so she's not driving when she's so... I mean, all of these sort of details about how to support her. I want her to have her own therapist who's supportive of the process. I want her ideally to be in a support group, or at least with someone who understands the issues. Because she's going to need support, and she can't get it from him. You know, he's not going to be the one who can be there for her. And we're going to have, now her job, by the way, as I said, is to set boundaries. So her job, while he's preparing his list of secrets and lies, basically, her job is to say, okay, now this is what you need to do going forward. If I'm going to be around, and I don't know that I am, but if I choose to stay around, you're going to have to do this. I want you in 3 meetings a week. I want you to have your cell phone on you at all times and be able to be available whenever I want to call you. I've had women want their guys to have pagers on. Now, codependent? Who cares? You know, the truth is that, and I'm going to write a book about this, I just want you to know this. These guys, I should put it on the, I don't have time. The place where these men are living right now, it's not in their home. It's not, there's a particular visual I want you to have of where the men I work with in treatment who want to be back in their relationships are living. And it's a triangular roof line with a little path and an open doorway, and the word above the door is woof. Where are they living? The doghouse, that's right. So you don't defend, you don't deny, you don't make excuses, you don't say, no, I'm not going to do that. You just, because you want to earn your spouse's trust and respect back, you do what's asked of you. And that's okay, because you've really hurt this person, and they get to be more demanding. They get to see what your sexual sobriety is. They get to be able to reach you whenever they need to. They get to rage at you if you're 10 minutes late, and you didn't call and say you're going to be 10 minutes late. You know why? Because when you're 10 minutes late, even though you know you're just being 10 minutes late, in her mind she's thinking, oh my God, he's at it again. So she needs to know that if you got to suit up and show up for what you say you're going to suit up and show up for, which, by the way, is just being a good husband anyway, I think. What we do disclose in treatment, we disclose things like the number of contacts, the dates that they occurred, the frequency of the occurrences, what kind of sexual behavior was it, what kind of money was spent, arrests, diseases, the names of the partners, any unknowns that were gone on prior to the relationship, how much time in a week, a month, a year the person spent in these behaviors. We don't disclose graphic details, how large her breasts were, what kind of lubrication you use. We don't do that because we don't want to give, if they're going to stay together, if the couple's going to be together, we don't want to give her images that she's never going to be able to let go of, that are going to haunt her in some kind of post-traumatic nightmare. Now, she'll want to know. She'll say, were her breasts larger than mine? Because I know that's it. And I'll step in and say, that information is really not important. What's important is you know the history, you know what's gone on, you know where the holes are, but we're not going to talk about the specific details of their sexual acts, because she'll never get that out of her head. So I do have to set boundaries around. We're not just a free-for-all about everything he's ever done and where. That's why we go over it. We also, and I feel strongly about this, we do not disclose to children. Now, sometimes an angry spouse, feeling desperate and having whatever issues they have, wanting to get the kids on her side, will tell the kids. And I think that's unfortunate. I think it's perfectly fine to say that, Dad and I are having a difficult time. Dad needs to get some help. Mom and Dad are fighting. But specific sexual details of your parents' history are not something I don't want to know. I don't think any kid wants to know. And I have talked to adult children, a number of them, who were disclosed to adult children of sex addicts, so adults who were disclosed to when they were younger about their parents' sex addiction. And they said, you know what, I really wish I'd never known. That's just not something I need to know about my parents. And it tends to be much more hurtful and much more problematic to tell children, or even adult children, and so we don't unless there's something like an intervention involved. I'm almost done, by the way. When disclosure is contraindicated, we wouldn't do this, and I want to be really clear about this. I do not do disclosure if a couple is not staying together. If they're going to divorce or permanently separate, there is no reason to give this woman something she can take to her divorce attorney and say, see, here's the list. That's not helpful for anyone. She doesn't get to know if they're not moving forward together. There's no reason for her to know. That's not a punishment. It's just, what difference does it make? He betrayed you massively. You don't want to be with him? Understandable. But there's no reason to go through the details. It's just going to haunt you forever, and there's no resolution here. So we don't do disclosure if a couple is not going to be going forward together. There just isn't a reason to. We don't do disclosure when a spouse doesn't want it. So if she says, and I've had particularly religious spouses, for example, who I've had Orthodox Jewish women, and I've had fundamentalist Christian women who said, you know what, my belief system says, this is true, I have to stay with my husband. But my belief system also says that if I hear all of these things, I won't be able to stay with my husband. So I don't want to know. And I have to respect that. She doesn't have to know. And if she's not willing to get support and be in support for herself, this is a little bit of my power or our power with her to get her into getting some support and help. She's not going to have disclosure unless she has some kind of regular support, because I'm not going to drop that bomb on someone who's going to go home and take a bottle of pills. I mean, that's just not going to happen. If he's disclosing out of anger to hurt her, well, let me show you who I slept with. There's no disclosure. If he's trying to show off, well, you didn't want me, but let me show you all the women who did. There's no disclosure. If he's trying to dump his history on her to make himself feel better, we don't do disclosure. If she is profoundly physically, emotionally vulnerable, we don't do disclosure. I've had spouses come in 8 months pregnant. We don't do disclosure at 8.5 months pregnant. We just don't. I've had spouses come in who have a history of psychosis. We're very careful about doing disclosure when I have a spouse with those kinds of issues. This is not a willy-nilly process. God, willy-nilly. Who says willy-nilly? Where the heck did that come from anyway? Okay. Let me just say this one thing, and I'll take questions. At the heart of the spouse's concern is simply this. How do I know that this is all there is? How could I know that this is the truth? How will I know if he continues to go back to the behavior? He hid it from me so well before. How will I know if, these are the things she's thinking about whether she wants to stay or not. How can we even begin to reestablish trust after I've been hurt in this way? And that's, by the way, what that famous couple is looking at. How do we reestablish trust? We have 2 children under the age of 6, right? Or something like that. How do we reestablish trust? By the way, the best thing that man did on television, the thing that told me, you all saw, well, of course you probably did, Mr. Wood's thing he did on TV when he said his after-treatment statement or mid-treatment statement. The thing that made me really hopeful for him and then made me know he was working with Pine Grove and Pat Carnes, or people who know the work, right? Like we do at SRI, don't forget us, is that he said, I'm not going back to work right away. He said, I'm not going back to work right away. And I thought, now that's a man who understands what his priorities are now. His priority is not winning another golf game. His priorities are not getting his sponsors back. His priority is parenting those children, developing a relationship with them, and rebuilding trust with his wife, and understanding how it is that he could have ended up there so that he doesn't make those choices again. That's what he needs to do with his time. By the way, I have to say that Donald Trump on Larry King, whatever you think of Mr. Trump, but he got on right after the whole Tiger Woods thing happened, and Donald Trump got on Larry King and he said, you know what this guy does? This is the LaDonald, right? He said, Tiger just needs to go back and play some more golf and win some games. And I thought, that's how you got in your marital troubles. You just needed to make a little more money and everything was going to be fine. That's not how it works. And by the way, that's not what brings people real happiness. Men get confused about what's really important sometimes. So really quickly, and I haven't forgotten you had a question. How do you rebuild trust? I have one sentence for that, and one sentence only, even though I'll probably give you more sentences and say more. And there it is. Love is behavior. Love is behavior. He is going to the 12-step meetings, and he's not saying to you, I hate these freaking meetings, I don't want to go, why are you making me go? He doesn't say, I'm tired of this therapy and I don't want to see this person anymore. He doesn't bristle because you asked him to run an errand and, he forgot to do it and you're mad. Love is behavior. It's not, here's other sentences. Love is not words, commitments, ideas, plans, apologies, tearful declarations, candy, flowers, or jewelry. I mean, those are nice things, but they're not what love is. When someone has been once basic trust has been violated, you don't win basic trust back with candy and flowers. It takes action to win trust back. Are you going to become the person I want to be married to now? Are you going to be the husband and father that I expect and that I want? Now, I'm not saying that they have to be the perfect person for the rest of their life. They're not going to be perfect. And they may not do recovery perfectly. And there may be sexual slips. And no spouse wants to hear that. I just want to thank you. I'll remind you that you can go to the SASH website, sash.net, or iatap.com. If you want to get certification in sex addiction treatment, you want to learn more about this work. We're at sexualrecovery.com. We have tons of articles, information, and books and all that good stuff, 12-step referrals. Thank you for your time. Have a safe and happy weekend.